Hello, everyone. I'm not muted. I did it. Hi, everyone. I'm Kai. Welcome to my channel, Estelle of Imladris. I use he, they, and she pronouns, and I am so excited to be here for another installment of Seems Right, my show about costuming and storytelling. Gosh, it's been a great, busy weekend for me. I was out at WonderCon all weekend. I'm so grateful to have you all here, to be back streaming. I'm sorry that the announcement for this was very, very sudden, but this was the day and time that I could fit it in, so here we are. So I've got a busy week, but I always love streaming and talking to all of you. So we're gonna have 2 streams this week still, today and another one on Thursday with more Stray. But let's not skip to that. We'll get there. First, let's talk about all of my usual show opening stuff, starting with a call to action. It is a dark time to be a marginalized person. It has been for much longer than this year, but right now in particular, the world feels very dark and heavy. It is important that we reach out to each other, to community, to build meaningful and lasting ties outside of establishments, governments, or faceless digital spaces. Part of why I started this channel was to offer free information and education for those who want to remove systemic, personal, or financial barriers that would keep this from being accessible, because I believe the only way forward is together. So thank you so much for being here, but also I urge you to find one person or more and connect with them. Be there for each other. It doesn't have to be in person, but I encourage you to find ways to be open and in community with others. Community is how we will be here long after this era of darkness passes, just as we have always been. So thank you all so much, and please remember to not only take care of yourself, but take care of each other. And with that also, today in this episode of Seems Right, we're going to talk about where to begin. It's often one of the most difficult steps in beginning any kind of process, and so I wanted to kind of start from zero with everyone. And as per usual, this show we might encounter some content that may or may not be great, especially because we're going to go into the bowels of the internet today. So just as a heads up and kind of a warning, and I'm going to try and also educate as we go about some of this, but we're going to go on Pinterest today. I don't know if you've noticed, but Pinterest has been an absolute hellscape of AI images. It is not my intent to share these images in any uplifting way. I think AI is a destructive and especially generative AI is a destructive and evil force in the world that we live in. Not only is it bad for the environment, it is terrible for people like me who are creatives who need to see, I don't know, real things. So I'm gonna try and do this as carefully as I can while also talking to you about what I am seeing and why I know that it is AI or not AI. Because that is going to be one of the hardest things in this modern day and age where there is accessible images across the internet. There's a lot of them that are fake, and that's really sad and upsetting. Yes, boo, tomato, tomato, tomato. So yeah, that's what we're going to do today, and it's going to be kind of, I'm going to show you kind of my process and how I've learned both as a TTRPG creator, but also as a costume designer and someone who studied acting and a bunch of other disciplines that actually teach you how to build character concepts. We're going to just kind of walk through that process together so that I can show you how to kind of do this for yourself and do it in a way that isn't just looking at a blank page, because nothing is scarier than a blank page. I think that that's a universal truth. So yeah, if at any point in time you have questions, you have, resources that you're looking for, we're going to try and steer away from like specifically consulting on like individual people's character questions, but I am happy to offer resources, places to look for inspiration. If you're looking for like a particular era and that kind of stuff, I'm also happy to go down that road. So throw those questions in chat. I'm going to try and keep track of those as we go today as well. And as usual, this is going to be about a 2-hour stream with a break in the middle. Yeah, Erica, you're so right. So yes, first and foremost, the blank page. The the good news, especially for most of you who watch this thinking about tabletop characters, but this is all universal, I think, for any visual development or even development for a character that is meant to then be executed in a visual fashion. So like maybe this won't work great if you're designing a thought form in the nebula of the ether that does not ever have a physical form. Outside of that, though, I feel like this might be relevant for writing stories, writing, TTRPGs in general. Hopefully, and I know people who use a lot of these processes for working on animation and that kind of stuff. So all of these hopefully all apply to all character building and through that storytelling. So let's jump right in. So for tabletop, since that is where a lot of us come from, thankfully you don't start with a blank page. If you are building a character in a tabletop game, you have a bunch of excellent resources from your GM who has built a setting, hopefully, or the source books that they are drawing from all have context. You know the ground that you stand on in that world is concrete, unpaved, grassy, wet, wooden. The options are vast, but to know where your character stands and what kind of world they stand in is the beginning. So asking questions or interrogating the source material that you are looking into with things like, when am I? If it's a fictional place, what is an analog that you as a person who lives in this world can kind of look into? Where are you? With the same questions of if it is fictional, are there analogs that you can look towards, even if it is an amalgamation? So like say someone is doing, I'm going to use like DC universe, comics universe as an example. If you're saying you're in Gotham, well, there's some pretty clear analogs to Gotham in the real world, even if you're not from Gotham. Just like how, to use an example from Transplanter, like Yaolan clearly draws from a lot of specifically like Chinese folklore. And you can go in and find what that history looks like and know what the world around this story is going to look like. So now your character's in a world. And that world can be simple and, cartoon, two-dimensional, which is fine, especially a lot of stories like that is the depth that they're going to go into, and that's fine. Or it can be vast and diverse, where it is as varied as the world we live in. And in that case, it's just a matter of, is your character one specific thing? Are we in Steven Universe where most of the, characters are either from Earth or they are gemstone people who all kind of fit a similar, like, fantastical energy that maybe interacts with Earth? And that's it. Those are your options. And they're great. And they're straightforward. Or you could be, I'm going to use another animated show that is the opposite of that, which is Adventure Time, where you could be a dog, you could be a unicorn, you could be just a guy, you can be a wizard who lives in an ice castle, you could be a bubblegum person. Like, they are all answers that are correct. And no one of them has a singular touchstone that is truly universally the same. And so knowing where you are is a great place to start. And if you are looking for inspiration beyond that, if you are looking at a blank character sheet or looking at, again, God forbid, a blank page, you can start by looking at the world that you're looking to inhabit and find something in that excites you, that intrigues you. So I just got off of stream a couple hours ago from my first session with the Fourth Age set in Tolkien's Middle-earth. You can go through and look at aspects of the world that Tolkien wrote and go, I like that. You can look at this real world and think about things in the real world you like to interrogate that you can do without being appropriative. You can look at anything. Truly anything can be a touchstone, but when you are looking for character inspiration, having that, as Erica said in chat, a North Star is an excellent place to start. So the example that I bring to you all, as I have talked about many times in this stream, because it's one of my favorites, and I spent a lot of time on him that isn't Zeinen, where I'd be telling you stories that you don't get to know yet, is Merrick from the Doomsayers. I'm going to go over and show you Merrick's Pinterest board. And I show you this because it is chaos. So some place setting for all of you who have not seen the Doomsayers, which is fine, and I'm not going to be spoiling anything that isn't said in the first like 10 minutes of the show, because this hasn't changed since the show started, basically. The Doomsayers is set in the same world as the Mythic Initiative over in Taino Tales, and it is a fantastical world where the like Dracula is real, but also the Greek gods are real, but also the Chupacabra is real. It's a world of yes. Yes, and worse, probably, because Chris Cologne is an evil trauma man. And so when approaching this show, I came very concept forward because I have always been in love with Greek myths, and specifically the story of Patroclus and Achilles. But it is also set in the 1980s. Our show is set in 1989 in a god-ruled from across multiple pantheons city. And so not only is this board full of Greek imagery, the shield, the Aegis of Achilles, fan art from the Hades game, just like raw inspiration images of statues of actual contemporaneous accounts from the Iliad of Patroclus and Achilles. So it's real stuff, but also there's just like pictures of wolves, pictures of random makeup looks, because it isn't so much about like how do I define the character yet. It is, what do they look like? How does it feel in his world? What does it look like? What does it feel like internally, externally? What textures, what world is he immersed in? So again, going from that macro question of the world that he lives in down to where is he? Who is he? What space does he inhabit? So just using yourself as a touchstone, even like for me, I could pull up images of Hollywood, where I live. Hello, everyone. I live in Hollywood. I could pull up images of Japanese Americans in California. I could pull up all sorts of touchstones. I like archery. I've shot a lot of archery, so I can pull up pictures of archery. I can pull up pictures of cats. As I was talking about earlier in the stream, I love conventions. I can pull up pictures of conventions and put them all in my style board for myself. And so to that end, also drawing on inspiration for your characters in the same way, without painting it with such a limited view. Now, to that end, paint carefully. As I said at the top of stream, and I've said in other streams, like the internet is a place full of either misinformation, which is what AI is. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. AI is not true. It's not information. It is a fiction created by a machine that is meant to look real. Sometimes it's right, but most often it's actually super wrong. And so I say this because I'm going to go on Pinterest now, deeper into Pinterest outside of my style board. And I'm going to search for something. Let's see. I'm going to search for, just for the sake of talking about like designing myself as a character. I'm gonna search Hollywood. Don't do this. It's gonna be bad. But like the images that you get of Hollywood are obviously very skewed, varied. A lot of these thankfully seem to be real, at least. So there's that. That's AI. Yeah, oh, that's super AI. Okay, so we're going to do our first how to identify AI on Pinterest lesson, because this is also AI. I'm not going to open that one, though, because it pisses me off. They all piss me off, but that one extra pisses me off. But if I were, say, doing a character that was the Silver Age of Hollywood reimagined, I could do this beautiful Paramount image. from the old studio, from their screening area. I could pull up this music of yesterday and have that as well. I could pull up this picture that I know is real because it's super famous, of cars driving through the Hollywood Hills. And all of this would all be great to add. But I'm going to open this picture just to show you. So this one is AI, and you can tell because if you look at the scansions, which is what those red ropes are called, if you look at the scansions, they are not real. They don't fall realistically in any way. They terminate in weird places. They actually, to me, yes, the lighting and all the other stuff about generated images is very much so a giveaway. But the one that always gets me, because this is where my eye looks, is always that AI doesn't do symmetry, and it doesn't do real clothing very well, real fabric very well. And so it can't complete a proper drape of a piece of fabric. It couldn't, I'm going to show you, I have a piece of Zynon's bandana from his hat here. It couldn't do this even if it wanted to. So just always look for repeat patterns. And if they are crystal clear, try and, look around that way. Yeah, they also super don't do arms well. You're right, Patrick. But my tip to you is to look for pattern and symmetry, because that is usually the easiest giveaway, because most AI can't do it. And in case you forgot, or you need reminding, or whatever, it's all stolen. So don't do that. But there's a lot of good things on here. There are other ways to do this that aren't Pinterest, to be very clear. And as a person who was a longtime hater of Pinterest, I salute you if you would like to find another thing that is not plagued with massive amounts of AI. I am a firm believer in having just big folders of reference images on my computer, but I use Pinterest because it is simple. So yeah, and I organize them. I collect them into different categories, and sometimes they're big, sometimes they're small. For those of you who say, I've listened to Lori's House, this is the inspiration board for Lori's House, even though I am the GM of that show. I make them for everything because, to me, making a world real is how you talk about it, how you find ways to then speak it into existence. So now that we've kind of looked at the broader world and we've talked about how to kind of close in slowly, even down to like theming. Okay, so I'm gonna go open Zynon's board. I'm gonna open his main board because there's so many of them. So this is the original board that I made for Zynon that really hasn't changed since Arc 1. I've added a few things here and there, but not much. And you'll notice there's stuff in here that is not like, there's this incredible image that I am obsessed with. Of a hand decaying and becoming bone, all holding itself. I think that's very Zynon core, personally. But it isn't something textually in his story. I have the Western Defense and Command 4th Army Declaration for Japanese internment in here, because that lives as a huge fixture in his story for me. So it's in this style board, so that when I'm looking at the board, that is not away from it. There are lots of cowboys. There's a black fox in here. There's all kinds of mood imagery on top of very functional, like how we're going to go send a board to an artist to do actual art of him. Because these boards, especially if you're building them for your own characters, whether that is for a novel or a tabletop game or a comic or a video game or whatever, they need to have full inner life. There are a lot of incredible acting tools out there available for creating inner life for like film and theater characters that have a script that they're working off of, because you kind of have to reverse engineer some things as you go through on some of those things. But for this, you're starting from zero. You are the writer, you are the visual developer, you are the costume designer or the animator, or you create all of this. So you get to create the whole inner life of this character through everything from inspiration images for what they look like this picture of one of the very first hats that ever inspired me for Zynon, to pictures of ghost cowboys, of which there is just a unrealistic number of in this board. But none of them are the same, and none of them are Zynon, but they are things that inspire me. This guy with neon paint that I found very early on ended up being a huge part of my inspiration. So you'll see that I kind of work it around in a circle where I start broad and I narrow it down until I am thinking specifically about what kind of hair, what color, what shape do they look like. So framing it in and editing. So as you go through, if you see an image that doesn't work anymore, remove it. Or save it somewhere else. Put those things somewhere to remember, but know that not everything you put in these boards has to stay there forever. Yes. Erica's talking about how the difference between, because they also have a lot of experience studying film, about how the freedom of actual play is that you get to make your own story. That's part of the thing that I love about actual play is I'm not just playing Patroclus the way it was written in Homer's work, in Homer, you know what I mean? But I get to play my version, who is a gay man in the 1980s, which is why I have imagery of extremely, this is a vintage photo that I found multiple versions of from the probably 80s. And there's also there's so much rich context that I get to pull from, that I get to decide is the world that I live in. And sometimes the stories write themselves in this case, but that works. So we close in as we're generating what our character is. Usually around this point, between the character sheet, and I always keep so let's talk about the places where my characters live, is obviously the character sheet. I keep a character Bible, which includes, intrinsic information about them, their height, their hair color, if they have a hair texture, the texture type, their skin tone, their eye color, and then also things like the names of their parents, if they have parents, if they have any other close relations, name and information about those. And I make these for me. A lot of GMs also obviously end up using them, but I make them because for me, then, if I need to kind of recenter myself in that character, I can go and look at a sheet that says, oh, my name is Merrick. I say Merrick in quotes because it's a name that he chose super recently at the beginning of the show, and even he knows it's just a name to not be called his real name. I'm Merrick. My father's name is Menoetius. My love's name is Achilles, and I am the fallen son of Opus. And these are facts that are written in that sheet that if I were trying to fall into that character, I could just go read that sheet. In fact, I'm going to do something that I never do. You're all going to get to see that sheet. Give me 1 second. I got to go into my many files. But I keep that in a text document for all of my characters so that I have their information outside of what the character sheet asks, outside of any visual reference sheet. I have it for me. So that I can go and use it as a touchstone. Merrick, my beloved, where are you? Okay. And we're back. I'm gonna zoom us in, don't you worry. Tools. Oh goodness. How do I zoom in? I don't remember how anything works. I know there's a zoom button. View. Haha. No. Fine. Oh, it's probably... Hold, please, while I remember how to do zooming. There, that works. Okay, so, as I said before, I keep intrinsic information in writing. His piercings, his notes about, because I wanted to be very clear about who he is, about his orientation, because it is such a feature in his story. Eyes, dark brown that flash gold. You'll note that I keep a note of hair texture. If you don't know about hair texture, we're going to do a little sidebar here. Hi, welcome. Hair texture, and using specific descriptors like 3A, is a way to talk about the diverse kinds of hair that we have in this world. All hair is beautiful, and to decentralize specifically European ways of talking about hair, I encourage all of you to go and learn about different types of hair texture and to talk about them using the terms that have been given to us by professionals who work with all kinds of hair. And so I'm always very clear, like, beyond just someone who has rail straight hair, I will pick a specific texture and I will look up the words of how that is respectfully described. So Merrick has 3A texture, which is stolen directly from what I think I would describe Oscar Isaac's hair as, because that is who I use for Merrick's face. And so there it is. 3A texture. They range from 1 to 4 and A to C, I believe. But they each describe either wavy, curly, crimped, straight textures of hair in different sizes and scales. And using this terminology not only makes it more inclusive to then talk about all kinds of hair, because people around the world have all kinds of hair, but it also allows you to then respectfully engage with it by looking up how people talk about it, so that you're not calling someone who has this hair, you're not saying that it's like kinked hair. That's not right. That's not the right term to use. And so the respectful way to approach hair texture would be to invite the conversation around what hair texture it is. Yes. Writing with color is a really good resource, Erica. They have a lot of really good resources there, and they also have really great ways to talk about skin tone outside of your standard, like, cinnamon skin and all of that. So there's a lot of really good resources on there. You'll notice I use... it's not on here because I use it down here. But he has honey skin. Because when you talk about your characters, you should talk about them with respect to not only their story, but because, again, we live in a society, we live in a world, respecting the people that are the touchstones and references for these things. So to that end, also, something that I always have on hand for all of my characters and for shows that the characters change looks, Transplant RPG, I will write a new one of these for every time the character changes looks in a major way. So that when you go in to describe your character, especially if you're an actual play, you don't have to think of beautiful words to describe your character. They're right there. It's awesome. And even if I go off script, I have this to kind of reference and pull sections of. You'll notice parts of it are bolded. This is what was sent to the artist. Venro did such a good job on these with very little direction on some of the very strange things that are in here. Like, he weirdly glows red. Figure it out. But this is in the moment, a snapshot of an intrinsic feature of who he is, which is, this is what he looks like. This is vaguely how he dresses. Welcome back. And then, especially for characters that I don't know if you all have noticed, but I love a character with scars. I personally have some scars. I know where they all come from. And to that end, I believe that all of my characters should have scars if they've lived a life at all, and they should remember where they come from. So I keep lists like this of exactly where the scars come from, what they mean. And for a lot of these, I'll actually go and if they're real, like I can't go reference what it looks like to be shot by an arrow of Apollo, but otherwise I can go and reference things like in the Zynon board, you saw that I had like burn scars in his. I won't enlarge it in case it creeps people out, but there are pictures of burn scars that were posted on the internet by people with permission or their makeup. This one's makeup. To reference when I talk about the texture of Zynon's skin. And so to that end, then I can choose the right words in advance, especially when talking about something sensitive like scarring, or if you are playing a character with disability, even if it is your disability, going through and finding the right words in advance will make you feel so much more certain about what you are talking about and how you are saying it in a way that you want it to be received. So a lot of wonderful and lovely things are said to me about the way I talk about things for my characters when I'm on stream. I don't pre-write a lot of things, but one of the big things I always try and do is at least pre-think of the language that I use around certain things, the way that I talk about Zynon's scars, or Merrick's monstrosity as he is a Vrikolakos. And so, yes, and Eric is talking about going and finding references for Gentle, who they've cosplayed, who is a character from The Second Stranger on Transplanar RPG. And Gentle has also lived a life, and they have, I don't know how anyone ever catches Gentle, because they are the fastest little tea drinker. You know, it happens on occasion, I guess. And Erica looking up shark bites as a reference, because characters go through stuff, and knowing what they look like and thinking through what that looks like is a part of honing in who they are. And then going through and, you know, if there's anything else, there's a lot. Merrick has a lot. This is part of the reason I use him as a point of reference, because he's got a lot. And then this is a section about his personality. So again, if I put Merrick away for years and say 3 years from now, Chris comes back to us and says, okay, it's time for more Doomsayers, I can go into this file and, knowing me, can go, okay, let me read this whole file, which admittedly is 19 pages of lore that I wrote. I can go through, and by the end of reading this, I will remember everything about Merrick that I need to know to play him the same way that I did when the show was new. That's usually my hope. And then, of course, there's also, like, recordings and things of the show that I can go back and touch base with. But, like today, I went back to Middle-earth, but I went back to Middle-earth as a character that I played starting in, I think, 2022, and his show ended in 2023, which was now a while ago. And I went into my notes, and even though it was a while ago, I still did this back then, and I read all of my notes for Erland and kind of cross-referenced some things and went, okay, perfect. I remember exactly who he is. I could play him like I stepped out of the finale of the show and into the episode today. And I feel like I did that, which is kind of neat. So as I kind of refine the character down from what they look like individually, I keep things like this. But that's after I've done big, broad research, and then a little bit tighter. So, like, you live in a world. What does that world look like? In that world, where do you live? So, like, I live on Earth, but within Earth, I live in Hollywood. What does Hollywood look like? Okay, now, who am I? That's the final question that you answer. And all of this involves research. Because if you didn't live where your character is from, or it's not a real place, you should research it. And even then, if you live there, you should still research it. You might learn something really cool. I love researching about Los Angeles personally. So let's talk about how to do that. I'll show you. There's the character sheet, obviously, if you're doing a TTRPG character, and then your visual reference, whatever that might be, whether that's a Pinterest board, an individual sheet. I encourage you to not let the illustration of your character be the be-all, end-all visualization of your character. I love artists. I love having character art. It is such a gift. But for you as the player, the genesis of this character, I encourage you to, well, first of all, to get art made, you should keep reference images in general. But also, a reference art is a single, usually like one view of the character. You don't know what they look like on the backside. What's in their pockets? What's the weather like around them? Fill it all in a little bit more. So like, one of my favorite things about cosplay, and I've said this in the cosplay stream, I think that was last week, is I like having things in my pockets. So when I was at WonderCon over the weekend, I was cosplaying Caleb Widowgas from Critical Role. And one of my favorite things with that costume is that I purposely made his spell component pouch with all of his level 1 through 3 spell components in his spell component pouch. So I'd walk up to him and be like, you want to see my pouch? And I'd open it up, and inside's an incense burner, an incense, copper wire, silver wire, bell, an iron bar, because all of these are from Dungeons and Dragons, from the source material spell components. And that's the stuff that goes on your reference sheet. You can go, oh, what does a incense burner in this world look like? What would it mean for, for Merrick, his manifestation of his abilities, he can touch threads of fate. And so I always describe it as him pulling like thick ropes from people. What does that rope look like? It certainly isn't in the artwork. It wasn't really relevant when we were making standard character art, but I need to know what that looks like. And like, Zynon's not waving around his Ema's knife. What does that knife look like when he's holding it? So you can go through and find this stuff and keep that on a visual board outside of the art. So those are the three: character sheet, visual reference, and written reference. And the same thing goes for NPCs, world building. You can do this for practically anything. Big, middle, tight. Now let's do some research. Okay, so this is my professional research portal that I use, that I made for myself. And we're going to start with just some really broad research stuff. So as I have said previously, I love Getty Images. It is free to search Getty Images and look at their stuff. And so long as you are not using it for public consumption, there's no reason why you can't go on here and search for an editorial piece of actual historical photography and use it for yourself to understand what's going on in a fictitious world. So I'll go on here, and this is usually one of my first stops if I'm looking at a world, and say, gosh, I'm trying to think of where to even pretend to look at. I'm going to start with New York City. Say I'm, I don't know, playing a newsie in a newsie game. I don't know. This is where my head's at right now. And make sure you have it switched to editorial. And I searched something massive. New York is big. People photograph it constantly. So you'll notice this is quite an array of pictures, because this is all pictures tagged with New York. What you're searching on here is a collection of editorial images that newspapers and websites can purchase and publish as part of their articles and things like that. So these are photos taken by photographers. The photographers are cited. The work location tends to be cited. Usually the subject of the photos, there's a description of it. All of these are searchable things. And within that, one of the best things about it, and why I go back to this one more than a lot of other places, is that their filters are amazing. So if you go into filters, so again, if we're doing newsies in, say, the turn of the century, This is not relevant. Cynthia Erivo is not relevant to this story that I'm trying to look into. But what is available is this lovely filter section. So I can say sort by newest, oldest, most popular, or best match. Depending on what it is, like I could just go, what's the oldest photos that they have of New York? And they don't even have photos. They have like cataloged woodblock prints when it was called New Amsterdam. And the information on here is pretty good. I'm going to try and zoom this in for you all because it's really, really cool. Zoom. Haha. Larger. No, larger. 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 There we go. Zoom. Larger. There we go. Okay. Nope, still. We're gonna do this. Boom. Okay, so details. It says that it comes from the Universal Images Group. And it was theoretically created. If they don't have a date, they put January 1st of a year. So they think that this was made in 1753. It was uploaded to their database in 2013. It tells you the kind of license if you were to license it, which is not relevant for research, but sometimes it's relevant for what I was using it for. And you can even find out like more about the Universal History Archive and why they contributed to this. So if you really want to go down the rabbit hole of ethical research, all that information is available to you on Getty Images. And then how do I zoom back out? Well, let me. Oh wait, I can just go view normal. Boom. Okay, in my tiny settings. So that is one image. And that's from the oldest. We don't necessarily need the oldest if we're researching Newsies at the turn of the century. So what you can do, actually, there's a section here that says date range. Custom date range. And I'm going to say, I usually, for things older than, I would say like 1990s, I usually give things about a 30-year block of research, give or take, depending on what it is. And then pre-Industrial Revolution, I might give it like a 50-year time range. To actually be able to see things from that era. But also, like, fashion is weird and people vary, but slower and slower over time as you go back in time. I hope that makes sense to you all. But I'm going to say for a turn of the century newsie, because we're talking like 1902, 1903, we're looking for like Industrial Revolution New York. So I'm going to say January, I'm going to say 1870, 1880 to... well, and so Erica's talking about the different decades when bustles were popular. Yes, that is true. And there's also the crinoline period. And then there's also the fact that panniers have been popular like 3 times. The thing to keep an eye on for fashion is that what is the peak of fashion, if you're looking at fashion plates, which is how they used to distribute fashion, look like 5 to 20 years behind where you are right now, unless you're like a really, really fashionable person, a younger fashionable person, because basically like someone in the 1930s, if they didn't have a lot of money, which there's a lot of people didn't in the 1930s, you could be wearing a repurposed dress that may be as old as the knots, the literally 1900s in that era. So fashion's weird. Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna go all the way up to 1910 for this range. And you can see now I've really narrowed it down. This is cool. These are tall ships sailing under the Brooklyn Bridge in 1880. So this is the kind of stuff that I'm talking when I say look at the world that your character exists in. How cool is this picture, first of all? But to know that the Brooklyn Bridge and the sailing ships were really like, the sailing ships could actually sail under the Brooklyn Bridge is very cool. You can see though that a lot of these are going to be towed by smaller tugboats and things like that to get actually safely through the Hudson. But how cool is that? I love that. You can see artistic renderings, because again, photography hasn't existed forever. This is cool. 1880s women with the worst era of skirts. Oh my god, I hate the skirts in this era. Shooting archery in Central Park. How cool is that? And this picture also reminds me to point out something very important, which is everyone in this picture is white. And so, yes, historical archives do have quite a skew, especially if they're about America, towards the white people in that era. I know that's a big surprise to everybody. Just look at it with a critical eye, especially if it is not a photograph, and either decide for the world that you are interpreting this for, even if it is supposed to be historical, if there is as egregious of inequality as there was in the real world, or if that's not the story you're telling, how you are going to adjust and address the inequalities of that era. Because like even this photo is, I don't see any people with dark skin in this picture, you know? But these photos are the world that these people could be living in. This photo looks like it very easily could have been used as a reference picture for BioShock Infinite, you know? It's so cool to see familiar landscapes with unfamiliar eras, in my opinion. And so I always go through and find images to pull out that inspire me from an era. And so here, this is a good beginning of, say we were actually doing a newsie. Here are 3 young boys on Ellis Island. These are going to be immigrant kids coming in with very little. You can see their clothing is not in the greatest shape. Their clothing does not fit them very well. But these are real kids. And you can go and say, okay, this is a very useful piece of history to me. Ooh, here's a colorized one. Oh my gosh. Oh no, it's a painting. Okay. I got excited for a minute. I'm sorry. So this is like time setting, place setting, learning what people looked like and dressed like, and what people were looking at, even like these kinds of the games of Pilgrim's Progress, going to Sunday school, and the Tower of Babel. You know, like this is stuff that you can add to an inspiration board if your character would see these things regularly. If these were plastered on the walls outside of where they were living or working. Or say you were doing a like carnival sort of thing. You could use this as inspiration for a carnival image. Yeah. So that's how you get down into the Getty images of it all. And you can do practically anything on there. It's truly wild what they have on there. And then I'm going to start us down the road of also looking at extant garments, but we are definitely going to come back to it after the break. But I want to take you over because I'm so excited. So extant garments are, here, hold on, let me open the Met. Extant literally just means like it is the original material. It is the dress, it is the suit from the actual era, from the people who made it. It is not a reproduction. It is not a picture of it. It is the real thing. So the reason I go to the Met, if I'm looking for extant garments, is, as I previously said, it is the largest collection of extant garments, I think, in the world. This is what the Met Gala funds, is this archive in particular of just the most incredible extant garments you've ever seen. So this will largely be higher end clothing, they tend to try and because a lot of clothing history that's preserved is from the perspective of fashion and not from the perspective of history. And very often, especially marginalized people, their clothing is worn until it falls apart, especially in times before now, but now we've gone back to it. So like, think about your most worn pair of shoes. If you've like worn through the sole of a pair of shoes, or you've worn it until the sole split in half, or there's holes everywhere, outside of like truly ancient garments, that tends to not be preserved, unfortunately. So like I was talking about with the plates and things like that, like look at it with a critical eye. And you should look at all historical research with a critical eye of, why aren't there people of color? Why is this picture this way? Why are we so staged? Where are all the women? Why aren't there pictures of X, Y, and Z? Like, truly, I encourage you to look at it all with a very critical eye, even for things like your character development for TTRPGs. So, we're going to look up one of my favorite dresses, because I don't like a lot of dresses, but I really like Worth gowns. So House of Worth was a couturier in France, one of the original fashion houses in the world. And they made the most exquisite Victorian gowns ever. So you can see all these say House of Worth. And I just think they're all beautiful. That's all. I'm just here to say these dresses, they're real pretty. So this is an original dress made by Jean-Philippe Worth, or at least made by the house when he was the overseer of it. And it's a ball gown. It was made between 1900 and 1905. And you can see that originally it was probably white, and it's still relatively white. A lot of the Worth gowns, unfortunately, are on loan to the Met, and they are... this one's owned by the Met, but there's like certain limitations around being able to enlarge them, so I'm going to navigate away from this, but you can see how well documented this dress is. So if you were, say, doing a dress that you wanted to be inspired by just the sheer amounts of detail, this is all beading and real embroidery with probably real gold. These flowers are made probably of silk. And one of the things I really like is they always show the waist tape and any labeling that might be in the garment. Labeling. A lot of couturiers will actually number their pieces, so that's what that is. And all of this, the reason for the Met Gala, the reason why they try and bring in so much money, is that all of this is free. It is free to go onto their website and open these pictures. And some of them even, can be enlarged quite big and zoomed in on, and you can see, oh my god, look at this fabric. You can zoom in and look at them in quite a bit of detail. Look at this beading. Holy smokes. And so if you were designing, I've actually used this dress as a research piece. I was doing a Wild West magic flute, because I'm me. So I set the magic flute in the Wild West, and I made the Queen of the Night a water baroness, where water was scarce in the desert, and so she was a water baroness, and I used this dress as part of the base for that costume, actually, now that I'm looking at it. And so, like, Wild West stuff, this is a great beginning. Would they actually wear this in the West? Probably not. Could I do it for fun? Yes. Yes. Erica's talking about other resources for like patterns and things like that. There are so many. But yes, the Met is miles above most other extant garment collections. It has beautiful things like this. Look at this cape. Look at it. It's a velvet cape with hand-done tassels. And like, this is a character. This. If I were looking to design like a funny little jester or a cute little child in a fantasy story, yeah, I'd be pulling from this. Why not? But yeah, that's it's been an hour, folks, already. I could keep doing this all day. If you have any questions or any subjects in particular that you would like to like find at least like a way to begin on, please let me know. I'm going to continue to take us on a tour of like research methods and things like that, and kind of talk about how we can continue to ethically interrogate the past for our own creative purposes. We're going to do more of that when we come back. So in the meantime, we're going to go on break, eat a snack, drink a drink, pet a pet if you can do so. I'm going to go pet my cats, and I'll be back in about 10 minutes for more of this, and I'll see you all soon. Bye. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Oh, goodness. We are back with more Seems Right. I am tickled because now we're going to start talking about more research stuff, but I'm going to start with kind of pivoting back towards the, like, how to take all of this, now that I've shown you a lot of research tools, and use it for things. So I'm going to actually use costume design as the example instead of talking about tabletop, because it's all the same thing. All right, so we're going to go over to this screen. All right, so this is my style sheets for production of Medea that I did in grad school. Hopefully I'm unmuted. Fairly certain I'm unmuted. Yeah, hi everybody. So Medea, the Greek tragedy originally written by Euripides, is a play that has been done many times in many versions, and this version, directed by Silvio Cervantes Blush, incredible director, was a very kind of modern take on this very, very often villainized tragedy. Is one of the very rare Greek tragedies that centers on a woman and her story, and it does not shy away from the womanness of it all. No man comes in and saves her. And the translation that we used was one done in more recent times that eliminated, again, that critical eye that you should always have. A lot of translations, especially of Greek myths, have been translated by people in the hegemonic majority. Lots of white men, lots of them translated Greek myths and Greek tragedies with very specific points of view that they put onto the mediums that weren't always congruent with the actual original works. All that is to say, look critically at translations and variations of stories outside of the original people who tell them. So this translation, and I wish I could remember the translator, it was very good. It was very much so that Medea's story was more about the tragedy and the wrongs that had been done to her, which is true, because she was, I don't know, kidnapped and married someone from a foreign land. It's just a lot of rage about it. And she's an imperfect, like, woman, no, don't get me wrong, but also, like, it is a tragedy that happened to her as much as the story that she creates is also a tragedy. It's very cool. But I go into all that just to kind of explain the framing of this. So this is the reference image that I gave the director when pitching what our lead character was going to look like. Yes, there are dresses in this picture, but there's also marble and smoke and a woman in water and a bunch of other things. Because basically we were doing very like abstracted, so it wasn't like truly traditional Greek. And it was meant to be very like movement based and things like that, which I'll show you pictures from it as well, just to kind of talk about the whole thing. But you can see how this and the Pinterest boards and stuff that I was showing you before all kind of come together. So we've got 2 runway pictures, a picture of a Greek statue interpretation of Medea, a fashion photo, well, 2 fashion photos, one of a woman in the desert with wind blowing on her and one with someone in water. And then these interesting kind of artsy images of red fabric blowing in the wind, red and black marble, kind of destroyed, beautiful white garment with blood on it and smoke. So I assembled this, obviously. And then I had to take this to the director and explain to her what was going on in my head. And similarly, I did that with all of the characters. So this is Jason, her husband, who was an Argonaut, who was the one who found the Golden Fleece. And so taking a cohesive view of things about the character that inspired me and elements that would end up in his costume. Everything from very modern runway pictures to, I think these were Etsy made bracers that I found, an actual statue of Jason from ancient times, this fascinating Shibari artwork. Like it takes all kinds, and then of course the Golden Fleece, gotta go in there. This is King Creon, who plays a major role in the story as well, and I was inspired by something completely different. So you just go through, and these are all correct explorations of what these characters look like. And you'll notice that each of them has a texture. They have colors that seem to be pretty cohesive. And genuinely, for this purpose, at least, I would actually Photoshop out colors that were not productive to the conversation. Aegeus, another, one with a different texture because he's a different king from a different place. The nurse who shows up a few times to specifically be a part of the story of the children, and their tutor, who are kind of point and counterpoint. They're meant to go together, and you'll see that they're the ones that actually have the pottery, because these are shown, these are Greek vases of actual people working. This is one of the cool things about a lot of ancient art, is there were people who just did art of people doing things. And so we've got these weaving women. And whereas these are learned men teaching and schooling on this piece of pottery, kind of to be point and counterpoint, because in the story they have opposite views of raising the children. And we've got textiles and more statues, because you can kind of see that this is the world that I'm setting it in, is this world of texture, of very like modern high fashion, and still keeping it grounded in the Greek side of it. So this is the messenger, who's the character that comes in and tells the big climactic monologue of what happened in the story. If you know the story of Medea, she does kill her children, and this is the person who tells that part of the story. And so that's why there's blood. There's kind of this like haunted side to this particular design. The children themselves, and then the chorus, who were heavily inspired by the Florence and the Machine music video of Big God, which is incredible. And I will show you what this all looks like in final interpretation. But I was very interested in what it looks like to be a veiled woman in a story where they're all talking about the problems of women. And the chorus voices both empathy for Medea and scorn for her, as these faceless women. And I did convince the director to actually let me make them faceless. So this is just the inspiration for their costumes. Obviously, these were all done in conversation with, for me, the source material was not only the play, but the director, the actors, if they were already cast, which I don't think they were by the time these sheets were made. And these conversations kind of go around and around and around, just like in tabletop, how we work around the table with the different people on whatever project or in whatever game. The same thing goes for film and theater. Like, you work around with your collaborators to kind of finesse and refine the story until it is the one we all want to tell. So that's just my style sheets. I'm going to hold on to those for a minute, but I'm also going to show you now my sketches. If I can remember where they are. Here we go. So, here she is, my girl. And we're just going to do a side-by-side so you can see both. So, now taking those, and in this case, I am the artist of the work, but if you were doing this for a show, I would refine this style sheet, give it a description, give textual references, maybe give them a face of an actor or a model that I think works very well for the character. And I'd send it along and say, use the texture of the marble, the silhouette of the dress with all the cool vines and stuff on it, and maybe this wrap thing that the original statue has, and kind of put those all together. Here's the face, here's the body type, go whole ham. So now, the illustration then comes from me being my own illustrator, having all that information and putting it into the art. So I drew this and digitally painted it now like forever ago. But this is Medea as inspired by all of this. And I hope you can kind of see that they go together. And you can do this and be the middleman of this by giving it to an artist and you know, explaining all of that stuff that isn't apparent in the style sheet. And for actually giving it to an artist, you would refine this away from some of the emotional stuff and really give the artist more concrete, like, this is exactly what I want this wrap to be. Here's the texture of the fabric. But sometimes you just do something artistic. Why, thank you. And the fun thing about this sash was also that she moved it and manipulated it a lot during the show. So we're going to do all three. I'm going to walk you all the way through the process on this one. You don't need to see the depth of my filing system that goes on forever and ever. But I do have really excellent photos of this show. So here she is. There are photos of the show on my portfolio as well. That's not even a great one. We're going to come back to that. I love her. So from inspiration board to yes, Erica's talking about how they didn't understand what blue was in ancient times. There's a linguistic evolution of the color blue, interestingly enough. But then this illustration turned into this beautiful interpretation in the final form, where the sash moves throughout the story and she uses it as part of her storytelling, because one of the pieces of status in ancient Greece was also large yardages of fabric and how they were draped over the body. And so here's her with the chorus. That's her with Aegeus. But you can even see just from these three versions of her that, like, the through line remains of her with the wrapped fabric. The shape of the dress seems to kind of stay consistent across them. And the idea persists, basically, is the main thing I'm trying to tell you, is that, like, the story can kind of move throughout. And, like, the dress was made for this show by our incredible head cutter for the costume shop. His name's Paul Gerard. I have to always give my big shout out to Paul Gerard. The actress name is Sarah. Wish I could remember her last name. She did an incredible job on this show. And so you can see from nothing, from literally just the blank page in my brain, taking the source material with the research of ancient Greece, textures and ideas, adding in color and the silhouette of it, which is a very important term that you should definitely put in your brain, of the shape of characters, especially if you're thinking about, like, animation. How if you look at all the characters in, say, like Avatar: The Last Airbender, they all have very specific silhouettes that if you just had them black and a cutout around them, you would kind of know who each of them is. And that works for everything, even if you are not seeing those silhouettes. If you can picture, like, the cast of the Chaos Protocol all in silhouette, all three of those main characters on Strike Team Nova all look very different in silhouette. That is another way to differentiate your character. So that's Medea. That's a little bit of just like how that magic kind of goes from nothing to an idea. Here's Jason. We'll do him too, just for fun. So like you can see how I took elements of the statue and put them in the costume. I took this amazing fashion draped shirt thing and put it into his costume. I tried to stay true to a lot of the more iconic elements of his costume as shown without giving him a helm by putting the golden fleece over his shoulder. And just every place that I could, adding more texture from the inspiration sheet into the final design. Oh yeah, and Jen's right. VTubers also, really strong silhouettes go a long way with VTubers. Where is my man in his fleece? Here he is. And then here's the final Jason. The final Jason. In the golden fleece with the drape and the blue shirt. He did have the leg wraps. Here's him with the kids. But trying to just always keep the original thought all the way back to the original conversations that I had with the director through the design process. And as you kind of shift the medium of this over to, say, your own storytelling, either for like, again, I go back to novel writing because I think that if I were to write a novel, I'd do this for all of my characters as well, where I would have sheets for each of them and probably sheets for each of the major regions if it were set in multiple regions with a city or the setting, you know. My son's trying to hang out. Everyone say hi to Rigby. Here he is. Hi, Rigby. He wants to be in my lap, so he's over here now. So yeah, you kind of work it around until there's a final product, and I don't mean that in the capitalist way. I mean that in the finished. Here, we'll go side by side, one by one, so you can kind of see them all. But I was trying to get to the chorus. Creon, where'd you go? There he is. Yeah. So these are just the illustrations, obviously. And the cool thing about costume design is that they're not meant to be the most literal when you're doing it for theater. You're supposed to then work with the tailor to kind of make it real. So, here's the nurse. The tutor. You'll see I picked like 2 colors for the whole show. That weren't beige.
Rigby, Iron Kiss says that she loves you.
He accepts the kissy. That's what I'll say. The messenger. And so trying to just like keep a firm idea from inspiration to interpretation. The children. And the chorus, my beloveds. And I got all the way here so that I can also show you, just because I love them, before we move on from Medea, the chorus. Because I love them in their pastels. So yeah, that's taking an idea from a source material, in this case, a play, and turning it into a finished image. But to that end, like, even if you're never going to make it, you could use this to describe them just as well. Or even the style sheet to pull out key terms of draped fabric where you can kind of ghostly see faces beneath it with bright individual colors. That's enough just based on this inspiration board. That could be, for your uses, just a Pinterest board. So we're going to close Medea now and go back to research. But again, as a reminder, if you have any questions, any thoughts that you would like clarification on, or any Rigby's that you want running across your lap, goodbye, Rigby. As he knocks over all of my books. Cool, thanks, man. So we're gonna go back to extant garments, and I'm gonna try and show you also ways to do more global research, because you'll notice that the Getty Images is based here in the United States. The Met is in New York, but I also have incredible international resources on here, because we can do that now. Oh, what silhouettes and inspiration we're using for Zynon? The genesis of a lot of Zynon's silhouette literally comes from I really liked Westerns as a kid, and so Clint Eastwood's Man with No Name lived in the forefront of my head when I was originally designing him with the poncho and everything. So we can literally just search. From the Dollars trilogy. I was like, what do they call that? Fistful of Dollars trilogy. So like this is when people talk about like Western silhouettes, they're usually actually talking about fictitious spaghetti Western silhouettes. And this was one that inspired me, but also then the other side of it, the thing that actually created these Westerns is samurai movies. So samurai movies, even literally this Screen Rant picture exists with Toshiro Mifune and Clint Eastwood because Toshiro basically played this character before it was cool. Obsessed with him. So I took not only the iconic Man with No Name silhouette, which is actually the name of that character, and yes, samurai movies definitely did inspire Star Wars. So you'll see, I mean, obviously in Arc 2 in the Chaos Protocol design, it's fully just wearing kimono, but even just like some of the silhouettes of kimono sleeves and stuff like that constantly make an appearance, even if it's not exactly what he's wearing. I also love like dirty rundown samurai silhouettes where they're like oh, what's the name of that one with the guy with the cat? Yeah. So like the silhouette of these is so iconic that I wanted Zynon to have a long silhouette with kind of narrow legs, because that's like the cowboy thing, but also having that long drape means that sometimes he looks more like this. Because I'm always trying to find ways to put my mixedness in all of my characters, and I am always happy to find a middle between multiple things and make them make sense. There we go. Yeah, there he is. So yeah, good question. Thanks for asking. So, international research. Something that I think we should all embrace is that while online translators aren't perfect, they're significantly better than nothing. And so long as you engage with the material respectfully and understand that you are not the authority on such things. Like, I'm never gonna be a professional consultant or write something without consulting someone, a cultural consultant from a culture that say I'm using a translation software just to read the language. So kind of going over to the Stray side of things, I have tagged in here for whatever reason an article about Kowloon, the walled city, which is the city that inspired the setting in Stray. So Kowloon, this is, I believe this is a page from a documentary that was made about it. But they have incredible resources of actual people in Kowloon. And this was documentary, images taken in the city. These are people making fish dumplings, baskets of eels just sitting in the alley waiting to be processed, outside of a hairdresser, inside of the hairdresser, going back to the salon that we just saw the last time we were playing. And so these, while again you can always question the presence of a photographer if they were an outsider or a part of the community, and interrogate the lens itself, like it is a lot harder to refute photographic evidence of history for research. So like this is an incredible photo of a place that is no longer there. There's a park where this was, and there's slaughtered animals. You can go and see, oh gosh, this is a very strange thing. There was a warehouse that was done to look like a theme park version of Kowloon. Yeah, amusement game park. And so these are fake versions of Kowloon mocked up as a amusement park. Deeply strange. Yeah, yes, I know. And you can see that there's like strange vending machines and arcade games, but also these very odd fake versions of this. I don't know. I forgot that existed. Anyways, but some of these actually tell you like why they were there. So like this is a photo series following a police officer going into Kowloon. A few of them, I guess. And this is just like firsthand research that you can't just get anywhere. So I'm sure I found that just by searching Kowloon, knowing me. But there's also, we're gonna go to the more normal research. I was just shocked that was in there because I don't remember adding that. So this is the National Library of Jamaica. So if you wanted to learn about Jamaica, there are usually national libraries in a lot of countries where there is just like free to access images and historical archives. So you can go in and search collections. And sometimes they have them sectioned like this, where this is pictorial representations of life in Jamaica dating back to ... but I'm sure it's very old. What I'm gonna look at though are these lantern slides, because these are pictures from Jamaica of houses and things like that. But even just houses, even if you're building people, you can start to kind of see the environment that they lived in, even if they're little, like these are. Sorry. Sometimes the pictures are not great, but they at least exist. And if you aren't finding it by searching it in English, use a translation device. As I said before, you might not be able to speak as an authority, but if you're getting just like a surface understanding, there's no harm in going, how do I search for, let's see here. Let's go Google Translate. We're gonna type in, and we're gonna pick a language. We're gonna search it in, let's search it in Korean. Why not? So I've searched archive and national. So if I search National Archive in Korean, now you'll notice my entire search is in Korean, which I don't speak. But Let's see. Usually, and it's not coming up, which would only be helpful. You can just click this and say, translate this page. Of course, that's Washington, D.C. Not helpful to me. But, nope, that's NARA. That's U.S. Here we go. Archives.go.korea. Translate this page. So now this is obviously an automated translation. It's not going to be great. It's not going to translate images. But I am now in a research archive in Korea. And I'm looking to see if there's any... these are name records. Digital collection. Haha. Special photo exhibition commemorating the 70th anniversary. Oh, cool. Yeah. Of the Republic of Korea US alliance. So yeah, like already I've really found an interesting collection of things, and I can just search by topic. Isn't that great? Ooh. The Coal Islands. Yes, let's go. So fascinated by this stuff. Open. Give me. And now I can tell Google again to please just translate it for me. And so this is literally talking about like the forced mobilization of people and coal mining offshore in Korea. And so this is from Korean people saying this. So again, one step closer to something authentically coming from that voice. Oh, so some of these are like super iconic too. For those of you who don't know, there's a lot of offshore coal mining in the Pacific that made for these very interesting coal cities. And I'm actually gonna look up those are wind. That's not what I'm looking for. Anyways, I'll go back to the Korean archive and we'll look at those. So the Gaijima coal mine. This is actually on the main island of Korea, I believe. But there's photos in their archive that I can look at and go, ah, yes. Oh, with handwritten old notes. That's cool. And now we're in, again, like non-Western research about the first-hand subject. Here's someone who's actively working there. Korean miners working in the Kojima Onoro number 7 mine shaft, an open-air mine. And so if this were relevant to you, if you were looking for something from Korea, here you go. This is from a Korean perspective that this is being told. And talking about the Japanese government who forced the Korean labor in these offshore mines. Yep. All of that is history. And it is searchable and referenceable not only here, but if you say wanted to know what the Japanese people thought of it, you can go read about it from their perspective. Because that's how research works. And all of this, lest you forget, is originally in Korean. So, yeah, it's just like it takes a lot of work, but to do something authentically, I think makes it more rich, not only for the story you're creating, but also for you. And like, if you were doing this obviously for like public consumption, whether on a stream or in a book or something you're publishing, you would want to hire someone to ask them about this and see if this is a subject that you should even be telling this story. But like, if you're Korean and you're exploring this story for yourself, Godspeed to you. It's really dark. But the ability to just search National Archive in Korean and find this exists, and you can do it in most languages so long as you can find a reliable translator. And then yeah, if you're lucky enough to work on projects with like a dramaturg, this is also a conversation you can have with them. And of course, the question you should always be asking yourself is this a story for me to tell? And in this case, like, I wouldn't tell this story because I'm the wrong side of this story and should not be telling it as a person of Japanese descent. I know quite a bit about this, and I have definitely helped in research in this direction. But as literally a descendant of the oppressing force of this story, it would feel really bad. It would feel super bad for me to do it, and you shouldn't do that. But yeah. So that's research in an international sense. And all of that then filters down to, again, like respectfully curating images for you to then use. So I'm going to go back to Pinterest now. So I'm going to show you a more personal character board with Hoshiro from Sun in Chains over on Bad House RPG, because Hoshiro was based in actual Japanese lore and history, while interrogating things that are very taboo in Japanese culture, being tattooing and facial hair and you know, like the idea of death and Shinigami and all that stuff, which is all a part of his story. But part of the research here is also me being very conscious of what is Japanese, what is Japanese styled, what isn't, and knowing what is mine to cultivate and be inspired by versus what is mine to use. And so, like, this is a Chinese costume made by a Chinese film. That's not for me to be the like final thing. That is not the Japanese story I am telling. But like, these are Japanese style Irazumi tattoos. I tried to specifically source ones that were made by Japanese tattoo artists or people who specialize in Irazumi tattooing. Even though Hoshiro, even the actor that I chose for him, he is mixed Scottish Japanese, who's also Emmy Award winning from Shogun. Love him. If you didn't know, Shogun is like if you ever want to know Japanese media that I approve of, Shogun is it. Shogun is made by American Japanese people from an American. Yes, he is part Scottish. He's one of us, Jen. But he was raised in Japan. But it's very cool. I love him. But he was my face I used for Hoshiro. And I tried to find places where it was very Japanese and places where it was purposely not. And having ownership over what that looks like culturally was very important to me. And so, like, taking that and also understanding that, like, I can take Japanese culture and break the rules of it, knowing what I know about Japanese culture. But I couldn't then do that for, say, going back to the Japanese coal mining, the enforced labor Korean coal miners in Japanese coal mines. That's not for me to take and tweak. So just, again, cannot stress enough, ethically approaching design and research, while doing fun things like adding capes where they don't belong. Because they don't belong, and challenging what is the status quo, because like tattoos are still super taboo in Japan. They're so taboo, and I love them. You actually can't go into certain onsen with tattoos. They don't like it. But yeah, wow. And then taking this and again turning it into something usable. This is my main inspiration picture for him. I'm obsessed with it. This is, I think this model is Korean, and here's all these freaking AI pictures. Not even gonna open them. They're pissing me off. Don't look at them. But the image was so crystal to me that you know, here's this tattooed character with a katana and kimono was very rich for me, so I went and cultivated that as the character. While keeping distance, like, this is not me. God, I'm not Hoshiro, he's not a good person. That's what I'll say. If you've watched the show, he fully murders a guy just to do it. He's not good, but I put a lot of like Oni imagery and things like that because he also sees himself as a bit of a villain. Yeah. So when I say like cultivate the world, the smaller sphere, and then down to your character, this style board alone, the world that he exists in is this one, right? Is this beautiful, very like Japanese inspired world, but also like Hoshiro in the story of the show, because the setting is a post-colonial setting. His father, one of his fathers was one of the colonizers, and so keeping pieces of a more Western story in there. So I have like examples of Western style armor and where's the other one? Just like pieces here and there where you can see like Western styling enter the story, keeping all of that while still, oh yeah, this was also part of that, as kind of a fusion piece, and letting it kind of be together and working it until you find all the right pieces. And I can say now, like, oh, this is the piece that I drew on for this thing, and this is the piece I drew on for this thing, is also important when you are creating a story, because you should not only know for your character who they are and where they come from, but then the research that you're doing, you can say like, oh yeah, this is not AI. This is something that I can engage with authority, or this is something that I need help with, and maybe asking and talking to people, and if you can, like paying consultants and a dramaturg and that kind of stuff. But even if you don't, like, just asking the question is so helpful of, is this mine to engage with, and how can I engage with it in a way that is complete, fulfilling, and correct for the story. So yeah, that's a lot of it. And then, you know, if you want to get down to the specifics of uniforming and clerical work and all that stuff, that's a whole other thing. But oh, hello, my other son. It's cat time, everybody. Oh God, Watson, why? So yeah, that's all the research stuff. So yes, the important 3 things: character sheet, your reference page, this thing. Keep them. I mean, you don't have to, it doesn't have to be this, but maybe make a more reasonable one than that.
Iron Fist says that she loves you.
We're bad. And then do a reference page, even if it is just for you, for when you're describing your character and you need to pull out details to talk about them. It is so much easier than making it up out of thin air to say, like, you know, if you were trying to describe this cold, like, what even is this? It's a metal thumb loop with leather straps holding it at the wrist. But I can only do that because I'm looking at it. So it gives you more authority and authenticity to talk about it, even if it is just in description. So yeah, with that, I think that's enough for that. We're gonna go over, talk about what's going on for the rest of the week. No. Hello, I pushed the wrong button. I'm back. I didn't go anywhere. So, for for the rest of the week, besides all of my deep thoughts on how to start big and then work your way smaller and write it all down, on Thursday, I'll be back with more Stray here at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. And then I'll be back on Saturday for more Chaos Protocol. We're going back to Inferno finally. I'm so excited. We're about to hit the very end of this arc. So things are coming to a head, and this episode is going to be wild. And then, gosh, out new this week, I'm also in a brand new episode of the Storyteller Squad, which is like how does Natalie, the GM, calls it like actual play lo-fi. It's very chill, but it's a really good time. I'm in a one-shot in their Expanded Universe series, is the finale of their Expanded Universe series, called Water in the Desert, featuring Latia Jaquise, who's incredible, Ivy and KP, all features of the space, all playing Monster of the Week. And I'm playing the chillest guy you've ever seen, who is a travel blogger and van dweller, who may or may not also be able to talk to Ghost, because I like Ghost. And we're solving a mystery of where's the water going in the desert. And their Storyteller Squad is based in a universe where a lot of cryptids and things like that are real. So it's a good time. It's a great story. Had a really good time recording it with them. And then there was another thing I was going to talk about. Besides, next week, there will be a new episode of Lori's House from Tender Vicious Studios, which you should go check out. The premiere is already out wherever you get your podcasts. Lori's House is a Home We Remember actual play, where I play the role of the architect or the game master. It is a story about exploring community and self-actualization, and there's a lot of other very deep and resonant themes that have entered that story throughout our telling of it. So I highly recommend you go check that out, and check out the forthcoming Home We Remember game, which there's a little info for it over on Tender Vicious Studios' actual page, which I will link to in a minute when I remember how to type. Blue sky gets weird when you shrink the window. Oh no, I was just talking about our show. Can't just come in here when I say the word Home We Remember. But yeah, you should go read about Lori's House and the Home We Remember, a forthcoming game. Here we go. There, this is what it is. There it is. And Spear Waddledy, aka Noir, here in chat, is one of our esteemed cast members and does an incredible job as Dean, who I adore. But yeah, that's kind of, I'm gonna look at my notes because I'm a little bit, it's been a busy day, everybody. You can also go check out the VOD for the Fourth Age for the episode that I was in literally this morning, and why my makeup still looks this way. And don't worry, the bleach is still there. It's just covered in makeup right now. Don't worry, I will go back to being a gray-streaked dad in a few hours when I wash my hair. But yeah, that's it for me. I'm gonna see who else is online. Thank you so much for hanging out and let me fill your brain with information on research and character design. If at any point in time you have any suggestions or thoughts of things that you'd like to see on stream, you can always go drop things in my open polls, or you can send things to my mailbox. And with that, I'm gonna go see who's on to raid. Thank you all for joining me, and I'll see you all on Thursday. Ooh, we're gonna raid Stella. All right, we're gonna go raid Stella Luna. I think that she's got a game. Oh yeah, it's her Humblewood series. So go give Stella all the love, and I'll see you all on Thursday. Bye.